of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first agenda item is introduction of Commissioner Hawkins.
Oath of allegiance.
Uh,
Oath of allegiance?
Oh, well,
Yes. So please raise your right hand. Right. Oath of allegiance for public officers and employees. I state your name.
I, Lori Hawkins,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies,
against all enemies,
foreign and domestic,
foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I will take this obligation freely
that I will take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully
and that I will well and faithfully
discharge the duties
discharge the duties
upon which I am about to enter.
upon which I'm about to enter.
Welcome, Commissioner Hawkins.
all right, now we will do the introduction for Commissioner Hawkins. So
Yes.
if you want to just say something about you.
A little intro. I've been a resident here of West Sacramento for going on 11, almost 12 years. Moved my family here from the Central Valley. I own a mortgage company here locally, and between my husband and I, we have 6 grown children who 5 of the 6 still reside in West Sacramento too.
All right, so now we will call for the presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of this commission. Anyone wishing to address the commission should fill out the request
To speak for.
to speak from and present to the clerk. So do we have any?
We do not have any public presentations.
Okay. All right, the next item on the agenda is commissioner communications. Do you guys have any? We do have one staff request is moving agenda item number 5 to 4. Here. I motion to make that change.
So moved. Right.
What's up?
Seconded?
Yep.
Thank you.
And
All ayes?
all ayes?
Aye.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Second item on the agenda is consideration of the approval of the minutes of February 13, 2017 meeting.
I think there's just one correction on the Age-Friendly Advisory Committee. I think I'm supposed to be the guy on the Age-Friendly Advisory Committee and not Commissioner Leonard. That was my recollection.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry for nominating you.
Any other corrections? No. I motion to pass the minutes from last meeting.
Seconded.
Anybody opposes? All right, all ayes. All right, we'll move to the agenda item number 3, presentation on broadband infrastructure action plan.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Mark Zolo. I'm with the Community Development Department, and this is a short presentation on the status of the broadband assessment and master plan for the entire city. As an overview, I'll talk about how data is growing in our society and in our lives. It's growing exponentially. We perceive the growth in our lives. We see how our houses are congested with devices, and we're using data more, our kids are using data more. It's also occurring in lesser visible ways, but very important ways. Things such as machine-type communications, and also reliable low-latency communications, which sounds really esoteric, but it's the stuff that drives a lot of the systems we do, like for navigation on cars, for self-driving cars that are coming down the pike, logistics, et cetera. It's how we run networks. And they're very important, and they're getting very dense. And so fiber systems and broadband capacity will be very important throughout the country to support those systems, as well as the stuff we see and use. Also, inadequate infrastructure and barriers to access to broadband is impacting other decisions in our lives, including how our children receive education, how we conduct our work and perceive economic opportunities, and also for things like for the ability for seniors and others to remain engaged and stay in their homes, stay in their community, et cetera. In that context, and the way it's growing, it's becoming not an optional service or something we can live without. It's becoming critical infrastructure. The background for the report is based on two processes that have been taking place in the last couple of years. The first was the Yolo County Broadband Strategic Plan, which was brought to the council in May 2015. And after that, the city decided to do an opportunities analysis of some of its own infrastructure. We're kind of fortunate in that we have a lot of cool infrastructure within the city. It's kind of nice. A lot of communities don't have it. And one of the things we have is a conduit that goes underneath the river, which is highly desirable for communication purposes for fiber. On the heels of that, we decided to do a citywide assessment to look at how people feel about their broadband services that was available, the types of services that are available, and the types of infrastructure that are already deployed in the city. We completed that in January. We're working on some additional assessments, some door-to-door surveys, or designing a door-to-door survey for the North area neighborhoods to look at some particular issues in those neighborhoods. We're also looking at a set of actions we thought we would develop, and I'll talk about those in a moment. And we are scheduling a presentation for council on those things in April. So the report's findings. The technological trend, and this is a big thing because we're always worried about like what's the next great thing. Are we committing to something that's going to become obsolete in a couple years? And the short answer is that fiber is not going away. It remains the most capable and robust technology for growing broadband capacity and delivering broadband capacity. In that context, the trick of the tail with new technologies will be getting those technologies onto fiber sooner. The other thing about that is the technologies that we'll see are technologies that are focused on solving last mile problems. So the backbone, the freeway, as you will remain fiber, and it'll be about systems that can get our data and our communications and our work onto those highways quicker. One of the findings about West Sacramento were pretty typical. We scored a C- in the Central Valley East Bay Consortium scales. We're a little bit better than most of the cities in Yolo County. We're a little bit behind metropolitan Sacramento area. We're really similar to cities elsewhere in California. We score the same as Mountain View and Cupertino, for example. So even cities with, megafauna of the technological world have the same challenges we're having with broadband. Also, we found that, and this is also typical too, is that broadband adoption it correlates directly to income. So people are price sensitive about broadband. Regardless of how important it is, there's always a sensitivity to price, which is kind of interesting too. Some of the actions we've been thinking about and we'll be bringing to the council for consideration in April are, one is to develop a request for proposal to look at the infrastructure we control and see if we can lease it, sell it, do a partnership in order to deploy more capacity within the city strategically. We're looking at promoting the AT&T Access Program. When AT&T bought DirecTV, they were mandated to offer a low-cost broadband to low-income families. And it's just really out, and it's not well known. And so we'll be doing some work to get that word out so that people that can afford it or have a need for broadband, can have a path to getting onto a broadband service. The next thing we'd like to do is to discuss an industrial fiber project with property owners in the Southport Industrial Park and Seaway property areas. There are paths of travel to develop a conduit system that would tie into internet backbones, which would be highly, highly desirable for industrial and commercial uses. We'd like to discuss that with property owners down there. We're looking at and reviewing our permitting and land use properties to see where we can facilitate processes that enhance the deployment of fiber conduit and other strategies. And lastly, we're looking at developing a set of public policy positions for the council to consider. One of the things that's kind of obviously missing from the discussion with broadband is local government as a stakeholder in the process. When you look at CPUC communications and interactions, and the same at the FCC level, there's no coherent position for local governments, and it's lacking. So we think there's some strategies there that should rise up. We should communicate our positions more. We do a lot locally to facilitate the deployment of broadband services in the city. The way broadband service providers can go through the right-of-way, we think there should be reciprocal relationships to allow us to pursue the public purpose of deploying greater fiber capacity, because everybody will benefit. And that's one of the key things too. A lot of the models, the business models, are based on ownership of the infrastructure, and slowly as it becomes more ubiquitous and more widespread and the demand keeps growing, the business model will shift more towards access. So it'll be in everybody's interest to create access to broadband, because that's where the business model will be. And for that to happen, in part, local government should be there to help shape that discussion and help define that. It's a long-term thought on it, but it's already starting to shape that way. We see it in different industries, technological industries now, where the value of the concern of the business isn't so much in its control of the thing, but in the use of the thing. Facebook would be a great example of that. And so that's where we're at right now. We're going to bring it to council sometime in April. I'll take any questions if there are any.
Mr. Chair, is it okay if I go? Okay. So, Mr. Zolo, thank you. It's actually more of a comment than a question, although a question might arise. You mentioned when you started your discussion of RFPs and the strategy, you emphasized access. And in the assessment that we were provided, in the appendices, there's a listing of cities, a handful of cities. I mean, granted, there's 500 city counties here, so it's a small sampling of what's happening in some other areas. And what I couldn't help but think of, especially in the policy recommendation portion of this assessment, is the city of Santa Monica. Now, for example, that city has its own net system, right? It's if you're probably familiar, what is it called? CityNet.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's its own fiber network. I think it's at 100 gigabytes. So very, very fast network. And when I look further into the city of Santa Monica, it looks like their system lowers their own telecom costs as a city itself, operating all of those different functions of broadband. Obviously, it's attractive to businesses, and it was built incrementally, I believe, without any debt to the city.
Yeah.
So very impressive, in other words. I'm not saying that this is one size fit all. There's plenty of differences between the two cities. Not to mention Santa Monica is only about 6 square miles, so it's
Right.
For infrastructure, a different system. But it does offer something of a roadmap for other communities, and you mentioned the idea of a position for local government to be in and, or to take as stakeholders. And I just want to kind of emphasize that and the idea that while it may not fit exactly with the city, there's some best practices there that could potentially be examined, especially given the profitability of their broadband system to the city, and they sell and lease it, correct, to the businesses there. So I just thought maybe there's an opportunity for not just stakeholders with private providers like AT&T and Wave, which is detailed in this assessment much further, but also the idea of partnership and intersectional leadership with other cities as part of this stakeholder relationship. If you, just like I said, just a comment on that, or if you've looked at Santa Monica as an example, or
San Leandro would be another example of a lesser scale, same concept though, where they decided to pioneer. And Santa Monica's case was they had some internal customers that formed the foundation of it, and they were always looking ahead. It's worked in some places, it hasn't worked in others. I would say that is exactly, though, the temperament we would like to set is that, you know, the solutions are, in a sense, geographically specific, right? Where the opportunities are, where you can craft, you know, a pure public solution, a private-public partnership, or a private solution. Generally speaking, places where public networks have been successful, they've had their own electric utilities because a lot of the infrastructure is already in place. You know, they have the pathway, they have the poles, they have the conduit already. But yeah, we've been thinking about that too, how that might work. One thing we have some really cool right-of-way in the city, and that's worth something, yeah. So how it will work will depend on the opportunities. And at the end, there has to be somebody at the end that wants to use the thing, right? You have to have a business or a neighborhood or something like that that wants to use it. So it's kind of a case by case. In Santa Monica's case, it was, you know, it's kind of interesting that way, yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned outreach and I guess sort of a lobbying effort with local government as a stakeholder in these issues with the Public Utilities Commission. And honestly, that was one of the things that really jumped out at me in this TELUS Associates report is that while local government can do a lot of different things at the margins to improve access, a lot of these are big statewide regulatory problems with improving access. So I'm curious what the city's outreach in terms of the Public Utilities Commission issues would look like, whether there are groups of local governments that are already advocating for stakeholder involvement in that way.
We're still working on that. Yeah, it's exactly what we're trying to understand and develop some positions on it. So I can't quite answer it right now.
I have a question. The service that AT&T offers for the lower income housing, is that available now, or it's something that we would need to get access to offer to our
It's
residents?
available now. There's, it's kind of has a finite life though, so that might actually be a public policy position right there. That and some other things too. But it's available now, and when we do the North Area surveys, we'll actually have some materials that we can
So
hand
it's
out.
just kind of a matter of informing
Yeah.
people? Okay,
Yeah,
great.
let them know it's there. As a first step.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
My second question is, the city or the public involvement, government involvement in the restructuring, is it potential savings for the city because having their own infrastructure, or is it also potential income for the city, or a combination of both?
Yeah, I think that, again, that goes to the specifics of the project, right? How it's going to pencil in the objectives of the project. I think the first concern is to look at where we can lower barriers and change practices and encourage the deployment of fiber. I think the industrial project might be a place for collaboration out there. I don't know yet. We haven't talked to them. We haven't looked at the specifics of the engineering of it, the cost. That might be a different project. The north area, it may be outreach, education to help solve some of those problems. It depends on the specifics of it. Going into the internet business it's a big jump. It's not a core competency of the government generally.
Right.
Yeah.
And my last question is probably more a comment, is moving here in 2005, living out in the Lakes area, we only had, we can only do dish-type service. And then we eventually had, Charter, which became Wave, and then we eventually had AT&T, so then it was like, wow, we've got, now we've got a array of services. And so I think the lack of competition now, here we are 10, 12 years later, I think that's a big deal in what we experience in the service that we receive, just as a consumer. We have an office off of Halyard, and it was horrible service. There's times during the day that we have no service at all, and then the customer service is, horrible. And so I think that not only from the residential but the business side, I think the competition would be very healthy.
Yeah, that you're citing a very common response to our surveys.
Good. That's it.
I know you don't have the plan set up yet, but where generally would funding come from for something like this? Conceptually.
Conceptually, on the SIP project, the most specific one, the one that's most capital in my mind right now, that we're working on, we discuss the property owners helping to fund it because they're going to gain the benefit of it.
So those would be just larger industrial users in the area?
For that specific project
Yeah,
at this
yeah.
time. So off the top of for that, we also already have assets. We'll see how we can leverage those assets. We have a conduit over the bridge, the McGowan Bridge, which is highly desirable. If you try to cross that river now on a project, you're looking at, substantial environmental costs to get across that body of water. So that's something that's going to be very valuable for providers improving and deploying more fiber to the southern area. We have the river conduit and other infrastructure as well. And we have lots of right-of-way. And the city of West Sacramento is kind of on the edge of an internet freeway. A lot of backhaul lines pass through our city. So we're kind of geographically well-suited, and we can facilitate projects in that. And that's a place for negotiation to get other assets and get more fiber.
Would you foresee any public financing component or individual property owner bonds or anything like that?
Oh, it's too early for me to even think about that until we
Okay.
talk, yeah.
And then what with plans like this, how do companies like AT&T and the other landline providers react to something like this? Is there a relationship or a franchise issue that arises?
It's variable. Some of the companies are dynamic. They're really kind of fun to work with.
Yeah.
AT is kind of like your grumpy uncle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I just have a comment. I think we need something like this for the city of West Sacramento, just being a resident here. And nowadays, you have smart home technologies, like you can open up locks from your phone. And, I live in the Bridgeway Lakes area too, and then we always don't have horrible service. And not having TVs, nobody's paying for TVs anymore, everybody's streaming Netflix.
Yeah.
So you always have horrible services. That's the same thing at the business. When we look to take our business online, and it just can't support a lot of the bandwidth. And like, we have a chat feature on our website that's not we can't have the same capability. The internet's not fast enough for something like that. So imagine if bringing in other companies that want to have warehouses out here, and a lot of people live over here, they work out in the Bay Area, and they work from home, and they don't have enough internet. So I think this is a good project.
I have just one question. So in the assessment report, it kind of had a lot of language in there that said, well, AT&T claims that they are providing this service, or we know Verizon has lines, but we don't know the exact infrastructure. And so in the future plans, is there going to be some sort of, plan to have more transparency with them, like a cooperative where you feel like you're getting the proper information rather than just relying kind of on what they, just what they say.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That could be one of the policy positions, because those reporting requirements are set by the CPUC, and they're generally at the census tract level, so they're not the most precise things for gauging performance. And also on mobile, there's good performance data it's congested. We all know it's congested, right? But for landline, even when people do speed tests and their own stuff, it's hard to know for sure if it's the system or something else, because everybody has different stuff on their home machine, so we don't know what background things are impacting the speed test and stuff like that. And there's proprietary reasons they try to keep it opaque.
Right.
Yeah, so it's kind of difficult. We work with the data we get from the CPUC and try to cross-reference it against testing data, independent data, and then perceptions and from the community when we ask them questions about how it's working for you. I know I'm supposed to have 35 megabits per second at home, and I've never been higher than 16 as far as I can
Right.
tell. Yeah,
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 thanks.
you're welcome.
Another quick question I had, you know, a lot of cities across the country are providing free Wi-Fi. Mobile, everybody's getting on their mobile devices. Would this play a part
Yeah.
of this plan? Like, I read a little bit about the Verizons and the, you know, the mobile services, so how would that impact us?
That's part of it, and that's part of the business, the shift in the business equation from ownership to access, and that's where you see places that see the value of having people online for other reasons, and it's shifting how it works so that you can find Wi-Fi. It's kind of a complicated thing, I think, to get it deployed universally. I mean, it would be something for the council to decide if they ever wanted to get into that business, so to speak, to make sure that there was public Wi-Fi or to fill in the gaps. We can certainly look at the map and see the gaps and describe a project. Whether or not it could happen from the city's point of view is different. That's a different,
Okay.
yeah. It's definitely going that way, though. It's
Yeah.
going to be everywhere.
Yeah, I like to do everything on my phone, so.
Me too.
All right, any other questions?
Yeah, just one more. Thank you. It occurred to me while we were in this discussion that with the city working on its water master plans, sewer master plans, there's going to be, in the future, digging up other areas, for example. And to kind of go back to the Santa Monica issue, I think one thing that was enabled there, speaking to the former city manager there, that there was coordination with departments within the city.
Yes.
So, hey, if you're digging up over here, your IT person would really like you to put in this cable while you're doing that. Is there opportunities there? I mean, based on what the infrastructure already is, what plans could be in the future, is there a way that the city could potentially look at, the plans for other projects that could potentially expand the broadband?
Yeah, we are looking at that as one of the policies. In fact, one part of it is making sure that the one project, that others know about it in time so that they can develop plans to participate in that project and get those conduits in there. And also, when we have the opportunities, things like the Bridge District, we put conduit in that project, a lot of conduit, to understanding that what would happen, and invited the private telecoms to participate in the project, give us their plans, and get their stuff in the ground. So yeah, we definitely are thinking about that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you. All right, next item on the agenda is presentation and discussion on the Water Master Plan Update and Capital Improvements Project.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Derek Goodwin, engineer for the Public Works Department here at City West Sacramento. And I'd like to congratulate one person I didn't congratulate last time, Ms. Hawkins, on your appointment. Congratulations. Tonight, what we're going to talk about is a second portion of what we talked about last week. Last time I was here, and thank you guys for having a special meeting. Last time I was here, we talked about CIP and infrastructure and how we moved along from the 2005 master plan to the current master plan, how we upgraded to fire flows, and how we came up with a vast list of projects for the next 5 years. We moved into the utility rate studies, and we had a council decision to go with an option to utility rate fund. we're moving into the next phases of that with this presentation. So this presentation moves beyond that. So all that was current infrastructure. The presentation tonight is based around growth. So everything that is, that the general plan produced in their growth projections, all the infrastructure or developments that we believe is coming online or have agreements with the city to have this growth, the Liberty, the Rivers, Bridge District, things to that nature. So with Chris, he'll present a little bit more in detail about these locations and how these growths relate and the projections of those numbers. So tonight, we had to do a little bit different. I was planning on going second, but tonight I'm going first because we had presentations of how that related to the impact fees. And when you hear impact fees, they'll be synonymous with connection fees. So we had that presentation, so we'll start that portion of it. Then the sewer master plan will present, and then if you guys are okay with it, I was going to close with the HF&H presentations with the financial impact fees that we currently have, so that way next time we come in April, you guys have a background to the new guiding principles that we're asking you to comment and give a presentation on. So let me see. Yep. With that, Chris. And I'll be here for any questions as soon as we're done. Thanks. Yeah, 5.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Thank you for having me back. My name is Chris Cleveland with Carollo Engineers. We're assisting Derek and Public Works Department with the Water Master Plan. And so we have a few slides to go by here. Thank you very much, Jennifer. So last time we were here, we started part 1, which covered kind of the existing facilities, the existing needs of the city, identifying how do we continue to support what the city already has at the level of service goals that the city has set. So this is part 2 of our presentation on the Water Master Plan that covers, okay, looking forward, what about new things that happen? What about the growth that's projected? And how do we support that moving forward? So happy to take any questions as I go or at the end. Feel free to jump in, and if you see something you have a question on, or feel free to wait at the end as well. Mr. Wells and I, Mr. Wells will be presenting on the Sewer Master Plan next. We have kind of some common slides, which is just a little bit on the general plan, and it drives both the Water Master Plan and the Sewer Master Plan, so they're kind of common background slides. So again, previously we talked about kind of what is a Water Master Plan, what's its purpose, what is contained in it, what do we use it for, and today we're going to be talking about the second part, growth and supporting the general plan capacity, and a similar capital improvements plan to support growth like we talked about for maintaining the existing facilities. So if we start just kind of from the general plan side of things, this is an area of art and science all to its own. This is not my area of expertise, but it's very, very important to both the Water and Sewer Master Plan, because our goal is to take the general plan, the vision for the city moving forward over the next 20 years, and be able to support that with infrastructure utilities that can support those growth goals. And so this is the current land use designations in the city, and we have various categories of single-family, multifamily, commercial, parks, vacant lots that are currently where we are, and it brings up the total acreage, and you can kind of see the general trends throughout the different parts of the city. Then they start developing the vision for the city, and the general plan is what kind of develops that through the process. And we look at, well, where is growth going to occur, and what are the types of growth that are going to occur in different parts of the city, or what does the city want to encourage for the types of growth in different parts of the city. And so each of these circles kind of represents a growth area. The size of the circle represents kind of the magnitude of the growth in a given area, and the colors represent different types of growth in each area. And so you can see a lot of growth along the northeast part of the city, the Triangle District or Bridge District now, and other areas in the port, in the South Port area, Bridgeway Lakes area, lots of residential potential growth down there. And this is over a 20-year planning period, so 2035. is where this is looking. And there's a small, very, very small table down at the bottom right that I just wanted you to see that it breaks it down into further details by neighborhood. You can go in and look at numbers that are behind each of these graphics. If you were interested, the general plan is on the city's website. You can spend many, many hours getting educated on this, and it's some really interesting thing, and I think it's something worthwhile to spend your time on if you have questions on that. For us, what it means is we take these neighborhood growth rates for both residential and non-residential growth, and we say, okay, here are the projections in the various neighborhoods, and it provides a general guidance for the type of land use and development that's expected to occur in each neighborhood. This is our input. This is where we come in and we start our work for supporting that growth. So if we look at that and we turn it into a water master plan, what matters to us is, well, how much water is this going to take to support this vision of this growth? And this is a projected population growth that goes along with that general plan through the planning period of 2035. And we then turn that into a water demand. And so the graph you have here on the x-axis along the bottom, we have years through the planning periods of 2035. On the y-axis, we have water demand in millions of gallons per day. And we have kind of two criteria that we use for doing water planning. The lower line is the green line. That's the historical average day demand. So if you take the entire amount of water that's used in 365 days and you divide it by 365, that's called your average day demand. That's useful for, do you have enough water rights on the river to supply a full year of water that you can pull from? The second line is a little bit more important, and that's your maximum day demand. That says in a given 24-hour period, in that year, what's the maximum amount of water that you need to be able to supply to the city to meet the projected growth that the general plan is indicating, and the amount of water that that growth will then drive. So the solid lines are historical real data, and you can see that the green line, for instance, we only have basically one dot per year, and then we just connect those dots. The blue line, though, changes throughout the year, as you might imagine, because in the summer, in an arid climate like we're in, we use a lot more water. So the maximum day demand in the city always occurs in the summer. Typically in this area, we tend to see it in the month of July, but sometimes it can go into August if the hotter months go there and landscaping continues. So that's why you have that kind of up and down movement of the maximum day demand throughout a given year. And then we do a basic projection based on this growth and water demands and demand criteria and potential conservation moving forward and new development using maybe less turf than existing development. All those types of things get factored into how much water is going to be used by a typical residential unit, how much is going to be used by a commercial unit, so on and so forth in all of those categories. And we create these curves that say this is what we need to be able to provide to support the general plan on the water side. So in the end, growth in the city is really driven by development projects. And you hear the types of development projects, the names of development projects, as you are involved in city government and you read the news and Utilites and all those other documents. So the timing, the exact timing is not defined. So we say, well, we're going to break this down into time periods. So we have the first 5 years, the second 5 years, phase 3, phase 4, all the way through the planning. We do our best to say, here's where we think these may land, but it's really all driven by when the developer decides he's going to put a shovel in the ground. And when that first building permit goes to an occupancy permit, he needs to have the right infrastructure in place from the city to support that occupancy permit and for someone to move into that house or move into that business. So the caveat to tonight's presentations are, this is the best guess we have about when these projects might occur. It's planning. So one project may fall off and a new one may come on and replace it. We don't always know. And so that's why you want to consistently update your water master plan about every 5 years as a recommendation. And you just keep kind of repeating that same process based on the best available information you have. So based on today's best information we have, there's a couple of significant projects, the larger projects that I've highlighted here in the city, and I'll just walk you through each one. The first one that seems to be maybe first potentially on the list based on what the city knows at this point is the Rivers development up in the northeast part of the city. That project has been in planning for quite a while and seems to be ready to move forward relatively soon. To support that development, there's a new tank and pump station in that area, 1.9 million gallon tank, along with a pump station to pump it out to the distribution system to serve that development. Another project that is potentially moving forward in the kind of phase one, first couple of years through 2020, is a transmission main, 12 inches in diameter, that goes along West Capitol, that feeds a tank that would eventually be built out to the west to support growth up in kind of the northwest part of the city. And then moving to the south, you mentioned, Mr. Commissioner, you live in Bridgeway Lakes, so there's an existing water tank out there you can see maybe from your house, probably. It's pretty flat out there. There's a master plan for 2 tanks out there to support the eventual full build-out in that area. And while the tank is in a future phase, probably phase 2 right now, or 2021 to 2025, the transmission main to carry all that additional water down to that area needs to precede the tank, or else the tank can't be filled. So we have a Jefferson Boulevard transmission main, 24 inches in diameter, planned for towards the end of phase 1 right now as a placeholder. And then the one that may fall in phase 1 right now, we're carrying it in phase 2, and if in your agenda report, you'll see it's not included in the phase 1 projects, but it's kind of on the bubble around there, so it could potentially be towards the end of phase 1, and so I wanted to just raise it to you tonight, is the Liberty Tank and Pump Station, a new development, the Liberties, and that would need its own tank and pump station, a little over 2 million gallons of storage there for that project. As you move towards the future phases of 2, 3, and 4, the master plan has more projects there, but again, because this is very dependent on things outside of the city's control, they're much less confident in the exact timing of those, but we list them, say here's where you're going to need them, and you update those over time if a new development comes in, and you can just move a project from a phase 3 to a phase 1, say okay, here's what you're going to need to support that development project. So that's the end of the Water Master Plan presentation. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
So I think at the last meeting, we talked about this 1.44 million gallon supply deficit in the Southport portion of the city. I've got a couple questions about that. One, does it ever cause problems currently, or is it lights go off? Does it cause any problems now, or is it more just a logistical challenge of getting water in the tanks that are already there?
Yeah, right now it doesn't cause an issue, and that's because you don't have full build out in the south. As more development and more demand occurs in the south, you only have so many crossings of water lines across the deep water channel, and so that's really where your bottleneck comes, is can I get enough water through those 1 to 2 to 3 pipelines, depending on where you are in your master plan infrastructure planning, to get that water down there so that you can put it into a tank down there and serve the local area. So I mentioned that there's 2 criteria for kind of water demand, average day demand and maximum day demand. There's a third one actually, which is called peak hour demand. And I talked a little bit about it last time. Peak hour demand is 6 a.m. in the morning when everyone's taking a shower. The water plant that is your only source of supply doesn't have the capacity, or isn't designed anyway at build out to have a capacity to meet your peak hour demand. So the water plant is sized to meet your maximum day demand. Your storage is sized to make up the difference between the peak hour demand and your max day demand. And so at 2 a.m., when you have a very low demand, that water plant is still pumping out a lot of water, and it's pumping it all the way down to the Bridgeway Lakes tank to fill it up, so that at 6 a.m., the water plant can supply some of that peak hour, and the tank can be drained and be used to supply the rest of that peak hour to make up the difference. And so that's kind of how a water system works to meet your peak hour demand without having to build huge peaking facilities for treatment and supply. So right now, it's not an issue. The Bridgeway Lakes 2 tank has been sized to handle the additional storage, as well as some makeup storage to make up that deficit. We can do it all in one tank. When the developer decides to build the capacity, the city will come in potentially and just provide a little bit larger storage tank to address that deficit.
Okay, so that deficit, though, is a projected deficit based on future development. It's not currently an existing?
It's a current deficit, only in that we've split the north half of the city and the south half of the city. If you look at it overall in the city, there's no deficit because you actually have more storage in the north than is needed, and so it can make up the difference. So if you had an infinite number of pipes across the deep river the deep channel, there wouldn't be an issue. It's just there's a little bit of a concern that, hey, there's only so many pipes that we can get across that river, and so over time, as demands grow in the south, it's something you may want to address. It's not a critical issue at this point.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have a presentation and discussion on the sewer master plan, an update on capital improvements project.
Good evening, Commissioners, and welcome, Commissioner Hawkins. We were here on February 13th to talk about, sewer rates and as it relates to our capital improvement program. Tonight, as Derek has pointed out, we're going to talk about the impact fee, potentially impact fee funded CIPs. Normally we would have our financial sub-consultant, follow the CIP discussion, but fortunately for us, and in the spirit of consolidating time, we both West Joe's and Carollo happen to have, HF&H as our financial consultants. That's why we're having them, bring up the rear and kind of tie everything together, okay? So I want to draw your attention to Table 1, and that kind of summarizes the CIP for the entire sewer master plan. So we have a total identified of about $56 million, and of that 56, about 36 can be attributed to the sewer rates, and we have about 20 million that can be, based on our current determination, can be attributed to impact fees. Now, keep in mind that what we're proposing for funding, both for the rate and for the impact fee study, is just about 25% of those totals. So if you look at column D, we're only proposing funding 5.2 million of impact fee driven projects. And the reason for that is to keeping in mind this is a 20-year look ahead, for the general plan. We're not asking for the entire amount and then not have the capability to deliver all these projects within the next 5 years. So in the spirit of keeping the rates from rising too fast, this goes both for the sewer rates and for the impact fees. That's why we're taking this slice approach of just looking ahead 5 years as far as funding projects. With that, I'd like to introduce Mr. John Wells again from West Joe's, and he's going to be going over some of our projects and then how we ended up prioritizing the projects for funding.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for having me back. I'm glad to be here. And the presentation is up. We'll just start. A lot of what we're going to talk about is going to follow exactly what we talked about on the water side of things, because the same growth patterns that drive more water consumption in the city are going to lead to more wastewater generation in the same points. Oops, a little bit faster. So I thought that we could just go over the growth projections that we talked about a little bit more, and then move in and talk about the projects. So I think this is exactly the same growth patterns that were shown previously, but rather than showing some of the sizes and colors, we tend to do things with sort of the heat maps. And so on the left-hand side, you're looking at new employees in terms of non-residential growth, and on the right-hand side, you're looking at terms of household for residential growth. And so the hotter the colors there, then the more growth that we're seeing in both of those categories. But the bottom line is it's exactly the same type of growth, whether it's in people, in employees, in water or sewer. We're all looking at sort of the same thing. The Bridge District or the Triangle District is showing a lot of growth in both employees and in households. Pioneer Bluff is showing growth in households. And if you look toward the south, over on the left-hand side, the Southport Industrial Park has a lot of growth in employees. So exactly what was shown before, just shown a little different way. And so what you're going to see is that there are some water projects that relate directly to that growth, and now we're going to have some sewer projects that relate directly to that growth. So it's a one-to-one correlation between those growth patterns and what we see on the facility side. So we'll talk a little bit about the future system findings. I think that this was discussed for the water master plan in a little bit more detail, but the future system is driven by capacity. We look at the capacity through a hydraulic model, same way that the water master plan looked at the water modeling. And the collection system for West Sacramento is a little bit more complicated than you would think for a community this size, because all of the wastewater flows to the various pump stations, and then the pump stations all share the force mains that they're discharging to, and so they interact with each other and fight with each other a little bit. They're not isolated like you would see in some places. And so coming up with the future needs and the capacities is a little bit more challenging than you would normally think. I'm showing one figure here because I think it's very interesting, and it shows some of the challenges of actually planning for the city of West Sacramento. That bottom figure is actually a graph, and the bottom line there that shows the sharp decrease is actually the flow that's going out of a pump station. The blue, the top triangle there, is actually the rain that's falling. So as the rain falls, some of it enters a collection system, there's more to pump. You expect the pump station to pump more. But because all of the pump stations are sharing one set of force mains exiting the city, and they're all sharing that capacity, and they're interacting with each other, there's a particular pump station that, because its pumps aren't really set for that, it actually pumps less when the rain starts and more flow comes in there, because the other pump stations are taking up more of that capacity. So it's not just as simple as saying, oh, we need to make a bigger pump station here because there's more flow going in. No, you've got to consider how it interacts with the other pump stations and sort of build that in there. So a little bit trickier than what we would normally see for a system like this, and all that is incorporated into the final report. Just a quick sort of collection system 101 look here. Basically, all the gravity mains as they flow downhill are modeled. We look at them under average day conditions, under peak conditions, as was talked about for the water master plan. And then rather than looking at peak hour or fire flow like they do in the water master plan, what we look at is the peak wet weather flow. So what is flowing through the system when you have the peak from the sanitary dischargers, like the businesses and the customers, and then with some rain coming in there. And basically the standard is that the gravity mains can fill up and they can sort of approach the ground, but if the water level gets within 3 feet of the ground, that gravity main is considered deficient, and so it needs to be replaced and increased in size. And so when we look at some of the projects, that's the criteria that we're applying there. And with that, we'll look at some of the capital improvement program for the future, which is based on this future capacity like we've just been talking about. So this is table one, as Vin was saying, $56 million in capital improvements total. Approximately $36 million are rate eligible for current improvements, and then there's a total of $20 million worth of improvements that are needed for the future, and $5 million of those which we are prioritizing. So that number is a little bit smaller than on the water side of things for two reasons that we'll bring up right from the front. Number one, this doesn't include any wastewater treatment costs, right? In the water master plan, you have to consider all the costs for the water treatment plant, but the city does not treat its own wastewater. That all goes to SAC Regional. So any future improvements for that would be covered by SAC Regional itself. And the second thing is that the city has done a very good job over the years of having some very, would have been considered conservative, but wouldn't be considered conservative anymore, design criteria for the sewer system. A lot of things were oversized, or they were sized with a lot of extra space when they were put in. And so that's a little bit extra investment in the past, but what that means is that a lot of the growth that is being projected is already built into the sewer system, and there's fewer deficiencies than you would think for the age and size of the system. There are 2 gravity main projects for future gravity mains on Hardy Drive up in the north part of the system. That relates directly to that lighthouse and the rivers project that was talked about in the water master plan. There's going to be more sewer coming from that, and so there's going to be a gravity main capacity increase in order to carry that flow to the south. And then Graphite Lane in the Ironworks area, the bridge area, growth is increasing, leading to a capacity main, or a capacity being undersized, a main being undersized, and so an increase in size on that. Both of those, I think, are existing 6-inch lines. They're fairly small. Hardy Lane is going to 15 inches to handle that, and then Graphite Lane is going to 10 inches to handle the flow. Another large project, which is recommended in the overall CIP but is not prioritized, is the wastewater treatment plant decommissioning. This project is being put in the master plan as a placeholder. This is a slightly tricky project because at one time the city had its own wastewater treatment plant, handled its own wastewater treatment, the same it does on the water side of things. The wastewater treatment plant was essentially abandoned and isn't being used anymore. Now the Sac Regional plant is being used, but it was never fully decommissioned so it could be used for other purposes. So. Although there's a question about, well, it doesn't seem like that should be something that developers pay for, and that makes sense going forward. But it's also not an area that existing ratepayers are getting any use out of. So it's still to be determined what the funds are going to be for that decommissioning. It's something that needs to happen, but it sort of straddles the line between where the funds should come from. So it could be some combination of rates. It could be some combination of the connection fee or the impact fee, and there could be some other sources of money that go toward actually decommissioning the treatment plant and letting that site be used. But we wanted to have it with a cost in the master plan as a placeholder. And then, as we talked about last time, wastewater tends to flow downhill, but at certain points we've got to pump it back uphill, and so. There are 4 lift stations that don't have the capacity for the future growth. One of them is the Bright Pump Station that is up in the north of the city, and so some of that growth that we saw in the lighthouse area and the bridges that flow goes to the Bright Pump Station, and that pump station needs to be increased in capacity. Largo Pump Station. In the south, because of the growth there, is undersized and needs more capacity. And then the south pump station, which is right on the northern border of the Deepwater Channel, actually takes the flow from the Pioneer Bluff area, and so the growth in the residential and non-residential growth there is leading to more capacity needed at the south pump station. Bridge District Lift Station is slightly undersized for future flow, but that is also a newer facility and has a lot of useful life left, and so that would be one of those projects that, although it's needed for the projected future flow, it's also going to be further out there in the further time frame, and there's no condition reasons driving that replacement, so that would be one that we wouldn't be prioritizing for funding, and we would see in later phases for funding. I have a figure here that shows the lift stations that we can use. If we have further questions, we can talk about where the pump stations and the lift stations are. And with that, we have the same ongoing activities as the water master plan, leading to the impact fees. And so I'm happy to answer any questions about the growth impacts on the sewer master plan.
Any questions or comments? No?
Just a quick one. Very quick. I know you guys said you were splitting this up and switching the order. My only questions have to do with impact fees. And so is this the right time, or are one of you coming back up to talk about that in summary?
We actually have one more presentation by
Perfect. Okay,
HF&H.
from HF&H? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments? All right, perfect. Thank you.
So next we have Mr. John Farnkoff from HF&H, and he's going to sort of give us an overview, introduction into impact fees and, you know, our current structure of our current impact fees.
Thank you, Vin. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, good evening. I'm John Farnkoff. I'm with HF&H Consultants. We've been helping you with the water and sewer rates. You've seen some of that recently, and now we've started to get engaged in the connection fee part of the study. I do have a presentation that might pop up. There we are. Let's see if I press the right button here. This one? Let's try that one. Nope. This one maybe. No. I have. Oh, just this. Oh, easy. Okay. Okay. You've just gotten the details on the kinds of projects the city has planned for providing capacity for growth. So, you know, growth is, it's yet to occur. You've got to provide that capacity, you've got to pay for it, and you've got to build it before those customers become customers. And a connection fee is a way of catching up those customers to get them to pay for their proportionate share at the time that they connect. In that way, what you're doing is you're trying to make sure that everybody, all customers, regardless of when they've connected to the system, have an equal share of the capital that had to be spent to provide their capacity. The connection fee, as I refer to it, is a type of a development impact fee. The general idea here is that it is designed to have growth reimburse ratepayers for any costs that they bore on their behalf to fund the capacity. It is a form of a reimbursement, at least that's the way I like to think of it. It's cost-based, but it's not a rate. It's a one-time charge, and it is not something that, because it's just a one-time charge, that, you know, it keeps up with costs the way rates do, where you can just constantly collect the revenue you need to cover your annual expenses. The significance of that is that because it's not subject to Prop 218, you don't have to go through the notification and the protest process that you do with rates. Cities and districts are authorized to charge impact fees, connection fees. It's called the Mitigation Fee Act. It's Government Code 66,000. Specifically, Section 13 deals with water and sewer capacity fees. Here's a little bit of language, and this is about all the language there is in the Act to guide us in setting these fees. The first quote up there refers to the charges. They shall not exceed the reasonable cost to provide that capacity. And the second quote there brings out the fact that you can include the costs of both existing facilities and some projected facilities. And typically, we look 5 years out into the future for those projected facilities. Other than that, there is no formula in the law that prescribes or proscribes how to calculate connection fees. And so it's really up to the analyst to perform a nexus connection here between the facilities that benefit growth and the amount of the fee. Has to be a reasonable relationship. What we do when we calculate these fees is that we always try to strive for cost recovery. We're going to be dealing with actual costs and not economic abstractions, just to keep it, you know, as intuitive as possible. And we're going to be proportioning these costs fairly among existing customers and ratepayers. And development. So I'm just going to remind you what your current connection fees look like. On the water side here, you have connection fees for water supply. You have a charge for each. You okay? You have a connection fee that's graduated in proportion to the size of the service connections or the meters. The 3/4-inch meter is the minimum charge, $7,893 per connection, and it goes up by each meter size to the highest size, 12-inch meter. That's a very large meter. There's a lot of capacity in a 12-inch meter, and you can see how much higher the the charge is. That's the highest connection fee that you currently have. You also have a connection fee for multifamily dwellings and mobile homes that's charged per unit. You have a connection fee for fire sprinklers. It's the same as the 3/4-inch meter charge, regardless of the size of the private fire connection. And you have two types of credits. You have, I think the first credits for the West Capitol Avenue and Washington specific plan areas are to encourage development. You also have credits for green buildings. Oops. On the sewer side, you have a connection for single-family customers. It's $3,405, 4-inch diameter lateral. You know, it's what any single-family connection is going to be. For multi-dwelling units, you look at it based on the number of bedrooms, where you assume that the sort of the default multifamily dwelling unit is 3 bedrooms, equivalent to a single family, and then you back off of it a little bit if there are fewer than 3 bedrooms. For commercial and industrial connections, you have 11 different land use types, and it's charged on a square footage basis. The smallest charge is $248 per 1,000 square feet for light industrial, and the highest is $1,021 per 1,000 square feet for business parks. There's a minimum charge of $3,405, and you also have a charge per fixture unit, which is kind of a handy charge because sometimes just for remodeling purposes and things like that, you can capture a portion of a connection that way. I keep going in the wrong direction, sorry. Here we go. Yep. For sewer, you also have credits in the Barge Canal area and for green buildings. Your sewer connection fees are for the collection system only, your facilities, but you also collect a treatment connection fee for the Sacramento Regional treatment facilities. They're the ones who set that fee. You're just simply collecting it on their behalf. So they have to take care of the, excuse me, the responsibility of setting it, and I assume also the Prop 218 process. You can see, excuse me.
Yeah, there we go. Can I jump in with a question real quick? On the credit, 50% north of Barge Canal for all customer classes, how does that, what's the justification for that credit and how is it computed?
I will have to defer to, yes.
The north area is basically the older part of the city. When I used to work in community development, any development in the north area we consider sort of infill. So the infrastructure is already in place. All we're managing now is just a conveyance system, right? So, the way our city is structured, most of the new development is occurring in Southport, as laid out by the general plan. And the goal of the impact fee is to have development pay its way. And that's why in all our previous impact fee studies, there's always been a 50% credit for that area north of the Barge Canal.
So the idea is that you don't need new facilities in that area north of the Barge Canal. The connection fee only covers the cost of the conveyance system, managing the conveyance system?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so those are the SAC regional charges, single-family, multifamily, and then commercial and industrial is case by case. So in going through a connection fee analysis, the way we would proceed typically would be to first just do our homework, familiarize ourselves with the existing charges, how they were determined, and come up with a list of questions to talk to staff about. We want to talk to the people who deal with the developers and get the feedback from the developers, find out what it's like to implement these charges, find out if there is anything in the structure they think might be worth looking at, possibly changing, looking at alternatives there. Look for anything that might be a little outdated, or something that, is coming in the future that you need to anticipate. We don't see too much on the legal scene that has changed how people should set connection fees, but we do want to make sure that, what you have in place is certainly defensible. Once we get that input, we'll be talking about any potential improvements that might be worth considering, some alternatives. What we like to do when we do this is make sure that it's understandable. That builds acceptance by the development community. We like to keep things simple also. This is a little bit different from rates again because you're dealing with sort of catching people up, reaching back and grabbing some costs that have already been incurred, as well as looking forward at costs that are coming, and just making sure that developers are comfortable about how that's been derived. There are some things that are being looked at these days to try to help developers. We don't necessarily want to encourage growth, but we don't want to do anything that might interfere with it or retard it. There are things that could be done, for example, just amortizing the charges, allowing developers to spread that cost out over the future and not take it as a big hit right up front. These are things that we see in other communities where, well, frankly, it's gotten a little competitive out there to attract and retain businesses. So we'll talk about some of those options. Whatever we do, we want to make it easy to update and administer. And as always, we want it to recover costs, but we want it to be defensible. With all of that groundwork behind us, then we'll calculate the fees. We'll talk about the methodology. There are two common approaches, a buy-in approach and incremental approach. Excuse me. From what I've seen and what you've done most recently, I think we would just continue with the existing methodology that you've been using. It looks quite good in most respects, and mostly needs to be updated. We'll come forward with a preliminary recommendation. We may even need a little input before then on some potential policy-related issues, but we'll get that built into a preliminary analysis to present to you and then to the council, and then refine it and finalize it. So that concludes my presentation. I can answer any questions, hopefully.
Anybody has questions or comments? Yeah.
So going back to this 1.44 million gallon supply deficit in Southport, that so my understanding with these capacity charges is that they're supposed to benefit only the new increments of growth, the new connections. So in other words, they pay for the capacity that's caused by new growth. Is that a fair statement? They're not supposed to?
I think that's a fair statement. The ability to look at individual facilities and say that this much is for growth and this much is for existing customers isn't always easy. The way I like to look at it is when people connect to a system, it provides capacity. It's an integrated network. If it's water, it's a distribution system, and if it's wastewater, it's a collection system. All of that capacity has a certain value, and it serves a certain number of connections. And you can calculate what that average cost of capacity is, and that can be the capacity fee. Just take that total value and divide it by the total number of connections that are served. That's one approach. And you can do that, for example, at least with the existing facilities, and the existing facilities have a certain value, and then you can look at the additional increment, and you can look at the capacity it provides and determine what its unit cost is, and add the two together. And that's essentially what your current methodology does.
So I guess my question then is, if you've got an existing capacity or supply deficit, and maybe it's not currently causing problems, but the deficit's already there, how do you pay for that with a development impact fee when the issue already exists, and presumably the increase in capacity would benefit all property owners, not just new developments?
Yeah, very good question. So this gets back to our previous discussion, which is why I thought I might jump in here. So if you look at the draft water master plan tables in the details, when you can't sleep some night, you can do that. What you'll see is that there's a breakout of, let's say, the Bridgeway Lakes 2 tank and pump station, or just the additional tank, and it's a shared amount between rates. Okay, it's in your agenda report. So it's a shared cost. So let's say it's, is it a 6, I don't know what the exact number is, Derek, 6?
52, I think the line says.
Yeah, so it's, let's say it's $9 million, just pick a number. And so we've broken up the amount that would go towards future development storage and the amount that covers the deficit that the city would like to add in storage. And it comes from 2 different pots of money then to cover the cost of that tank. So the rates will have some of that cost built in when it comes, and the impact fee will have the other part, and they combine to take the total cost of the project. You're welcome.
And when we look at this, there may be facilities that are specifically for growth. It's expansion into a new area, and that can be handled differently, and that's what your current methodology also does. In some cases, there may be facilities that have already been, or that you will require a specific development to pay for, and we have to be careful how we handle that. That would not be a cost that you would want to spread to other developments that don't benefit from it. But we try not to get too complicated about this. It gets very complicated if you want to make it, both in terms of sort of the distribution of the facilities throughout the town, where they're located, and also when they're constructed in time. And the more complicated the story gets, the harder it is, I think, for developers to understand, and the more troubles you invite. We try not to do that.
I have a comment. Recently having to pay for less than a 1,500 commercial space development in Southport area, having to pay the sewer impact fees. Nice to see where it actually goes. But, it's nice that you guys are actually evaluating the current connection fees with the developer community. But one comment I wanted to make is are you guys just looking at the bigger developers, or are you guys looking at the small business community too? Because, after I had to pay for those sewer impact fees, I talked to a couple of breweries around here, and they had to do it too. And these are some of the small businesses, they're not big developers. So are you guys also analyzing that, hey, how can small business grow in the community? Are you guys asking them if the impact fees impact them, or are they okay with them? Is something in place for that?
Well, I think you're getting into a policy area that we wouldn't be very involved with. What we'll be doing is performing an analysis that derives the connection fees. You don't necessarily have to charge those connection fees. You can have the credits that you do have. I really can't speak to the city's policy on how they would want to handle large versus small development.
Okay.
What is the comparison between what's been identified in these capital improvement projects in the next few years, first incremental phases of water and sewer expansion? So what's the total dollar amount that's needed versus what we think we'll be getting from these proposed fees? Is that part of what your analysis will discover? What's the delta? What's missing between the revenue that's generated from impact fees from the foreseeable general plan build-out with the identified projects? Is there a gap there?
There shouldn't be.
Okay.
You'd have a nexus problem, I think.
Yes.
I mean, we certainly don't want to come in low, and we don't want to go too high. We really want to target the fees for those specific projects. And the only thing that then has to happen is people have to connect, and nobody can really control that.
What is the relationship then between this expansion and new facilities and the decommissioning of the treatment plant? That looks like a pretty big number, and I don't know, I know it's a problem, and I know it needs to be addressed, but when we're talking about expanding facilities, this seems to be a pretty big dollar amount for something that's existing that wouldn't contribute to any expansion. Anyone?
Actually, we'd like to hear your thoughts on that. We realize that is a large cost. It is a necessary cost going forward. It was part of our system. We annexed the regional sand. Now, we are where we are. Now, the good news is, because of good planning, we have limited a very small amount of expansion needs as far as CIP projects. But, because we transitioned from having our own treatment plant, to regional sand, now we have to fully, renovate or make that particular site marketable for development or even usable. So, that is really a policy question that, we're happy to take comments on.
Could you tell us a little bit of the reasons it needs to be dealt with versus leaving it there? What are the consequences or the pros and cons, I guess?
Well, the biggest issue is much of the infrastructure, is considered hazardous waste. So until the, there's lots of metal and these huge tanks or wet wells that are used to store, effluent, it does need to be cleaned up. So you almost has to treat the entire site as a, hazardous waste site. So until that's done, until all the piping's removed, I'm not sure if you noticed, just even going south on South River Road, there's I think there's a 20 or 22-inch riser pipe that just past the McGowan Bridge. That's remnants of the old sewer treatment plant.
So it needs to be cleaned up because it's hazardous, so the cleaning up of it is probably comparable to the actually tearing it down, disposing of it. So if you're incurring that cost, you might as well incur the cost of getting rid of it, kind of?
Well, if it's hazardous waste, it means you have to basically dig it all up and provide chain of custody and properly dispose of it. So whenever you're dealing with hazardous waste, it's very expensive.
And there's no reason we would want to keep it or use it in the future? There's no potential?
Yeah, the cost to bring it back to life again, the regulations that's associated with sewer treatment plants continually evolve. It's really unrealistic to.
So just to summarize, my understanding is then that we have the money because we've done so well in preparing the system in the past with over improvements in the past, that possibly the money's there and it's something that needs to be done. So maybe one of the things we want to prioritize.
Well, the money isn't there yet.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've identified is 20 million of need, and we're only proposing to fund, a little over 5 million. And that does not include that wastewater, the old wastewater treatment plant. So with this particular impact fee study, we're only looking to fund a little over $5 million. And at this point, we don't have, I know we have a Pioneer Bluff transition plan that we're trying to implement, and, until the development is imminent, it's coming, if the scenario was different and we really want to develop that now, here and now, then by all means, then we should be looking at that and how we would pay for that.
I have a question. So, presume if you're going to fund decommissioning of that wastewater treatment plant with impact fees, that may be a long time coming, and I assume that's why it's not prioritized. Because if you've got a $14 million cost spread around developers and there's other room to grow, it's probably not going to happen soon. So are there risks? Is there any legal risk with leaving it as is until development occurs, until there's some kind of proposal on the table where you can recover the cost of decommissioning?
That's kind of what we're doing right now. Again, as John mentioned, it is just a placeholder that we put in the impact fee column. Now, as maybe in future master plan updates, we could make the case and draw a nexus and say, perhaps existing ratepayers need to pay for a portion of this cost, and, development can pay for a portion. But that is not what we're looking at right now.
But there's no risk that you know of continuing with the status quo of having a hazardous waste site there that's not being cleaned up and may not be cleaned up
Not that
for
I'm
20
aware
years.
of.
Okay,
So I think it is currently fenced off.
thanks.
Mike, my only comment to you is, or to everybody, is that it won't get any cheaper if we wait another 10 years, that's for sure. And our ability to collect greater impact fees may not increase with the exponential increase for that. And in order to make that area marketable for development, it can't be there, right? No one's going to want it, do anything about it. So we have this weird three-way relationship between Nexus expansion, or Nexus with expanding facilities in connection to Sac Regional and dealing with a legacy issue that kind of hamstrings development there, immediately surrounding that whole area, and that's part of the general plan's 2035 build-out. So if you can't get anybody interested to go into that site and decommission a treatment plant on their own for a parcel or for that whole little neighborhood, then you don't have your general plan build-out being fully realized. So it's just a complex issue. So I appreciate you guys, keeping it on there. Actually, it keeps it in the consciousness for the longer-term analysis, and yeah, it's a tough question.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda, Environmental and Utilities Commission calendar. Do we have anything, Jennifer?
The next meeting is Monday, April 10th, and so you want to put that in your calendars. And the following one will be Monday, June 12th.
Any other reports from the city staff?
None at this time.
Any future agenda item requests by Environmental and Utilities Commission? Okay, then at this point, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Anybody opposed? All right, we have all ayes.